different matters. A landmark ruling now has ruled that the ECHR says that governments have a duty to protect people from climate change. This is all about basically 2,000 women from Switzerland came together and challenged the Swiss government, basically, that their human rights basically were being undermined. This is basically Article 8 of the ECHR, and they won that ruling, that case. What do you make to this?
Well, the British judge didn't agree with the...
That's absolutely right.
With the ruling. And I think the really worrying thing about this is not about climate as such. The really worrying thing is that we've moved from a position over the last 30 years where judges knew that there was a line to be drawn between what was properly a political decision to be decided in a democracy, because all the countries that are part of the ECHR are democracies. There's a line to be drawn between those things that were decided in a democracy and those things that should be decided by the courts. And so what we've had, and it's been true of British courts as well, is this creeping judicialisation of what are essentially political decisions, things that judges in the past would have said, that's really for Parliament to decide, and Parliament is responsible to the electorate, and we shouldn't get involved in it. Now the judges are involved in everything, and that's what's happened here. Fundamentally, policies about how you deal with climate change are matters that should be decided in a democracy through political processes. If you move everything over into the courts, then you're devaluing democracy. What is the point of democracy if all the big decisions end up being taken by unelected judges?
Actually, before I bring you in, Jonathan, I will just say, actually, the UK judge, what he said, because you're quite right, he didn't vote in favour of it, what he actually said was, I fear that in this judgment, the majority has gone beyond what is legitimate and permissible for this court to do, and unfortunately, in doing so, may well have achieved exactly the opposite effect to what was intended.
Yeah.
What do you make to it, Jonathan?
I think there's always a debate to be had about how far courts should be involved in the application of law. I think that we obviously have to bear in mind that the judiciary is one of the branches of our constitution, just as it is in most other countries, and that judges have always had an important role to play. I was surprised by the ruling, but I think it's important in the sense that our understanding of what the law is and human rights evolves. Obviously, climate change would not have been considered a human rights issue in 1951, when the ECHR was sort of set up, because climate change didn't exist in those days and it wasn't a scientifically observable fact. Now it is, and we are seeing the results of that as these Swiss women were sort of arguing that their lives have been put at risk by heat waves. And the responsibility for stemming the risk of that comes from the Swiss government implementing what it has agreed to under the Paris Agreement, and if it doesn't live up to that, then it is endangering those women and compromising their human rights, which is not what would have been understood by human rights 30 years ago, but human rights can evolve. And so I think it is an important landmark in the sense that we're now considering human rights as a human rights issue, or climate change rather as a human rights issue, and I think that also we're going to be seeing a lot more of this in the years ahead when people, we have sort of migration that is as a product of climate change, for example, when sort of land becomes uninhabitable, and that sort of forces people to leave where they live.
And your point about democracy was an interesting one. One of the things that caught my eye, the lawyer who was actually representing these women, listen to what she had to say about the democracy and where this ruling fits into it. Listen.
Well, in Switzerland, it's particularly problematic because they have referendums. And one of the defences run by the government was, we had a referendum on this and the people decided they didn't want it. And therefore, we've done our best, effectively. But this is something that comes up all the time in relation to human rights. It's the conflict between this idea of democracy as just what the people choose and democracy as entailing some fundamental and universal rights, which matter irrespective of what the majority decides.
That's very interesting, isn't it?
Well, she's basically saying she wants the courts to make decisions because democracy doesn't give the right decision.
Doesn't give the right answer.
No, she's saying that there's something called majoritarianism, which is what she's talking about. How when a minority is affected in ways that the majority is not,
this was done
the majority should not be able to decide for everybody.
Family life.
Because
is about
the
your
Swiss
right
women
to a private
argued
family life.
Because the Swiss women argued that they were more at risk of climate change from heat waves, etc., because older people are more exposed than younger people. That was what they were arguing.
This is to do with your private life and family life.
Well, I think it's pretty important for a private life to be able to survive.
The whole thing's been made up, basically.
Oof, strong words there. Do you agree with that?